Okay, sorry, that cut off at a very critical moment when I was talking about slavery. Both women and men were slaves in this era. A lot of times they could sell themselves into slavery as an indentured servant, meaning, can I pay off my debts by working for you? Not the same thing as the slavery we typically think of. But once that was done, once they were bought, they were not free. And so you see that Sarah had offered her servant Hagar, an Egyptian, to have a baby for Isaac because she would not believe God that she was going to have a child. She didn't wait. So Ishmael was had. And Hagar went to God about it because she felt like she'd been mistreated and by Sarah. And it was because of Sarah's jealousy that, of course, would have come on her. It was a wrong move. And to this day, the nations of Isaac and Ishmael are still battling over in Israel and Palestine. The land is Israel's. Palestine was given something else. And so, and you see here that God did take care of that portion. And if you keep reading, it gives you all these names that were born of Ishmael. Again, read through them. It's always good. And then you see in verse 17, Ishmael lived 137 years, breathed his last. His descendants settled in the area of Havilah to Shur. This is the eastern border of Egypt as you go to Ashur. Look at the detail of directions of how to get on the map and the geography that we studied today to find that the Bible is true. It was anyway, but it's good to have these little things. The last line is important because God said this would happen to the descendants of Ishmael, and they lived in hostility toward all the tribes related to them. Do y'all remember in Genesis, I think 16? Let's go back. Genesis 16:12, I think it is. Yes, Hagar, a slave, is son, where have you come and where are you going? In verse 8, I'm running away from my mistress because she's mistreating her. He says, go back to her. I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. So he is not give up on her. And then it says in verse 12, he says, you're pregnant, you'll give birth to a son. His name will be Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild man. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And he will live in hostility towards all of his brothers. And she praises him because she says, you saw me and you've answered me. I gotta admit, I'd be like, wait, what? My line's gonna have nothing but hostility? She doesn't say that. She says, Lord, whatever you say about how this is supposed to go down is how it's going to go down. Do you know, I, for years and years and years, and at times it still rears its ugly head, was jealous of my big sister. She's older. My mother would seem to be closer to her. I wouldn't say she loved her more or that my daddy loved her more. They just, they worked for, I guess it was 6 years to get pregnant. And couldn't, and then finally my sister was born, so I think she was very, very special to them. There was 3 more years before I was born, and so she was very special to them. But there's been times in my life that I didn't understand, and I was jealous, and just like this, and there's going to be many stories in the Bible where jealousy could reign. Cain and Abel, Esau, there's going to be so many stories like that. Isaac and Ishmael. Where if God says, this is how I ordered it, then that's great for Hagar that she said, praise you. Thank you for being the one that saw me and did for me, instead of complaining about how it went. Isn't that something? And you know what? Praise be to God for how he ordered my family. And however it goes, it is up to him, and that makes it okay. If we get jealous, jealousy is fear of losing something you love. You're not going to lose the Lord. Remember, that's what the Lord said with the jealousy between Cain and Abel. He says, don't you know that I would have rewarded you? In other words, it was a lack of trust. You didn't trust me. You didn't. Trust is the thing with God. Trust is faith. It's impossible to please God without faith. And he will test your faith, just like he tested Abraham's. So, And it may not be that exact same test, but there'll be times where he will call on you to be happy with what he has decided for your life, and you trust him anyway, when it doesn't always look fair, or it doesn't look, your feelings get hurt, or you're just downright disappointed or angry, or don't let your anger ever be at God. It can be at a solution, towards figuring out a solution, but never at another person, and certainly not at God. So, okay, so let's keep going here. So we are now in verse 25. I'm sorry, chapter 25. He leaves everything in verse 5 to Isaac. Then he also says that he took care of the concubine's kids. And then we see his death. And then we see Ishmael and how he's described. And then you see the story of Isaac. So that's the story of Ishmael. Now we've seen the story of Isaac. Isaac's 40 years old. He marries Rebekah. 20 years later, if you see, that was in verse, chapter 25, verse 20, you see he's 40 years old, and then when you skip down, he's asking God for Rebekah to become pregnant. She has twins, and he says there's 2 nations in your womb. In verse 23, the older will serve the younger, and the first one came out red, and his whole body was hairy. That's Esau. And then you will see grasping onto his heel was Jacob. And it now says Isaac was 60 years old. So here's the promise. You're going to have these babies, Isaac, just like you want. But it was 20 years later. He was 40 when he asked. He was 60 when it happened. So 20 years later. So don't be surprised when God lets time pass on your promises. It's okay. It's in his timing. We can trust it. And then we see that the boys grew up. Hairy Esau becomes a skillful hunter. Jacob stayed home, and he was an excellent cook. I hate to see this. This is one of those things that you go, God's not fair. No, it's not that God's not fair. It's just the Bible's telling the truth of man. Isaac had a taste for wild game, so he loved Esau more. It says he loved Esau. But it says, but Rebekah loved Jacob. You see this set up there for some jealousy? That doesn't mean God was okay with that. He's just telling you the truth of how these people were. And so once when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came out of the open country. He's just about to die from starvation. So keep in mind, when they went hunting then, it could be life and death if they didn't get back in time. He says, quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished. This is why it was also called Edom, because Edom means red. Jacob's very mischievous, a little conniving, and you'll see that throughout his life. First, sell me your birthright. Look, I'm about to die, Esau says. So what good is my birthright to me? Esau has a habit, it seems, where, have you ever met a person that just doesn't seem to think through the consequences of their decision before they make them, and so they have a lot of bad decision making in their life? He seems to be a person like that. He didn't notice what he was giving up just because he was in a point of need, and so we have to be careful. You know that he would sell his whole birthright, which was a big deal then, for a bowl of stew, and if it was a promise made, it would be kept, and he did it. And he also chose wives in direct opposition to what his parents had told him, so he made some mistakes. And he also got big anger about this, we'll see as he goes on, and that's okay to be angry if you direct it towards a solution. It is not okay to be angry towards yourself or others, and certainly not God. The only worthy focal point in our lives is God. From the time we're born to the time we die. That's the only worthy focal point in your life. It doesn't mean you can't love a spouse or children or parents or siblings or your job or some of your possessions. It just means the focal point of your heart needs to be God and your eyes. So that's why daily we have to ask God to help us with that, because we're sinful people. And even though we've turned our lives over to Christ, we have to always be in touch with him and asking him and begging him to show us, and he will if we ask. And so it says, swear to me first in verse 33, and then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. So bread and lentil stew. That makes me want to go have some lentil stew. But anyway, he ate it and drank, and then he got up and left, and he despised his birthright. And what's that meaning is he's very angry about what he did after he filled his belly. Okay, y'all, that's it for this session. Very, very long again. I don't want to sell it short. I'm sorry this is coming out later. I hope I can get the other chapters in this week and get them all uploaded before Sunday night. So hang in there with me. Next we'll be doing 26 through 29. I love you guys, and I'll talk to you again soon.